Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Collected Clicks podcast. This is Brandon Bateman, and today I have Mike DeHaan on the podcast. Mike and I talk about all kinds of things I think you'll find interesting, including how he's built a fully virtual team, including overseas acquisitions managers, and how he's experimented with different markets to be in as a business and ultimately decided to focus on his home market. I'll see you there. Mike, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate having me on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. It's been a couple of years since we met, and I was actually
Yeah,
on your podcast originally. So it's cool. We've come full circle.
I know. It's funny when we got on because we just started working with you guys too at Bateman. And it says a lot. I really appreciated getting onboarded with you guys because when we had you on the show, which is like probably 2.5 years ago on Collecting Keys, we met with you afterwards, started talking around working with Bateman, and we weren't quite ready for it yet. We just hadn't scaled up enough. And the thing that I really appreciated was you gave us a ton of good feedback around how to play with PPC and stuff ourselves. And then we're like, all right, good luck. We'll see you later. And then we didn't talk to anyone on your team for 2 years. And then we connected with Noah again. And he still remembered who we were. He still had like his little file of what we talked about previously. And it was a better time. We were able to just get on board and it was super quick. So it wasn't like a hard sales and it was very like easy, comfortable conversation to reopen again.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to you for that. I do think you put a lot of trust in your marketing vendors
You do.
because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like your business lives or dies partially on marketing. Of course, that's the tough thing about this kind of business. Like there's a bunch of different things that need to go right at the same time in order for you to be profitable as a business.
Mhm.
And obviously marketing is one of those. There's some others as well, but it means a lot to me because if you choose the wrong vendors, it definitely can impact your business a lot.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of vendors these days, right? Like it's so different
Oh yeah.
from when I started wholesaling in 2019, where there was like 3 companies that you could even talk to, and they were usually owned by some guru that had been around for 5 or 6 years already and had decided to be a sell the shovel instead of try to dig for gold themselves. But now there's so many different marketing companies, people trying to do not industry specific stuff, but are just promising the world, right? And it is hard to pick and it's hard to find people that actually understand off-market real estate, which is a very unique type of marketing, I feel like, because your customers or who you're advertising to are not like you're trying to sell widgets to. It's a different kind of person.
Yeah, there's a lot for it. I remember this firsthand, just building out the team. Payment Collective at this point is 35-ish people, I want to say, most of which are involved with the direct delivery of our product. But the crazy thing is, like in most agencies, you can take somebody from another agency, like they're working at this other agency. We plug them over to start a job here. And it could be like a 3-day switch.
Mm.
Oh, just come here and just do what you were doing there.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. 'Cause everybody's like training everybody else's talent and the talent's just hopping around different agencies. And then we bring
That's
people
funny.
in and it's like we have to train them on all this really unique stuff that's
Yeah.
completely different from every other industry they know about. And it's wild. Like we have a longer time to ramp up people. And it's almost like we have a hard time even with senior level talent because you can bring in someone who's theoretically going to get started quick and know what they're doing. And it's almost like you have to unlearn a lot of those skills that you've learned other places in order to then build up the foundational skills that are important to know for this industry.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It makes sense on the marketing side of that. Same on sales side too, right? Like we can go and find a sales rep who's like the best at whatever they do, even if it's like a similar like type of sales, right? Like insurance or car sales, things like that. There's so many nuances when you're working with distressed sellers for homes, right? What like their personalities, there's always so much emotional baggage attached to everything. There's always so many potential questions or issues you need to preemptively know might exist. And that stuff only comes with training. I don't really know if there's other industries that are quite like that, but
Oh,
that's what makes
it's a
it
totally
interesting.
different game.
It
I mean,
is.
how often are you in sales negotiating to buy something? Nothing.
Right. Yeah. That's always, I think that's something that's changed about the wholesale business over the years is I feel like originally the sales process was more on the sales side,
Mm.
but there's been so many different like marketing companies that have built in, there's sophisticated people that are running that. In my opinion now, you don't make money without a buyer. That's how you actually monetize it. I really think the true sales process these days is on the buyer side. And when it comes to getting contracts, that's more like your product procurement, right? That is how you are getting the thing that you are going to sell. And at this point, just with the way the economy, everything's gone, it's harder to find good buyers. And needing to be able to like understand how to sell them and how to have that strong customer base is almost more important than on the seller side, because in a buyer's market, the sellers are going to be a lot more eager to work with you. If I look at now versus a couple of years ago, we're working with a lot more sellers that are like everyday people or even put together people. You have one right now, the seller's a lawyer and he's getting divorced and he's selling us a house for 70 cents on the dollar in one of the best neighborhoods here in town, just because he doesn't want his neighbors to know about his divorce. And they know that if they list it on the market and try to do a fast sale, it's going to get public. And things like that we didn't really see back in like 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, super interesting. Mike, I haven't even really introduced you.
Yeah. No worries. I just start talking. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did the same. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, like just explain the quick backstory. What do you do?
Sure. Yeah. So super quick backstory. I was a corporate engineer. That's what I started my adult life as. I went to school. I worked at Boeing. I quit that after 5 years and spent a little bit of time working in a gym and driving for Uber, and started getting into real estate, mostly because it was in every business book that I read. And also too, real estate's like the classic thing that like, if you're a bum and you don't know what you want to do, you go be a real estate person, right? That's so many agents are like X, whatever. And yeah, so I started flipping houses back in 2018, got into wholesale real estate late 2019, mostly because I wanted to buy better deals to flip. And now that's been my full-time gig since then. We just crossed 500 transactions since I started. So back in, I guess, November 2019 was when we first started marketing. And we've done 500 deals. I've built a decent little rental portfolio for myself. Most of our deals are wholesaling, but we do quite a few flips as well. And yeah, I've grown. I've done everything in the business in terms of like transaction type. Like we're opportunists with it. We've done sub-2 seller finance. We've done virtual stuff. We ran a span over the past couple of years where we were active in 15 different markets. So now we're down here local again. And yeah, I just like the marketing and sales side of real estate. I think it's a fun industry to be in. And then I also host a podcast called Collecting Keys, which is a show where we talk about being a real estate operator and what it actually looks like to run this business full time, which is, we're just talking about a very unique business. So,
Yeah, 100%. So what does your team look like?
so now so when we were in all these different markets, we'd scale up to 22 people. And so it was a lot. And we had 5 closers. We had a handful of VAs, had a TC that managed all those different closings. Now we've scaled down. And so yeah, in 2024, we did 156 transactions in all these different markets. The kind of model with that was we would do like one-ish a month in every market and just go for low-hanging fruit. And so we had this super wide marketing net. And we moved away from that just because keeping up with all the local laws and the local relationships to get deals done was so labor intensive. It was brutal. And so we've scaled down this year to just being in Eastern Washington and North Idaho and really focusing on marketing efforts here. And so right now it is me and my business partner. I run the marketing back end of it. Dan, my main business partner, he runs the TC and Dispo. Then we have another partner who basically runs sales. He's the acquisitions master over there. We have another salesperson, and then we have an overseas closer who basically does like the warm stuff, but has like high level conversations. Then we have a lead manager, and then we have an admin. And so that's 7 people. Okay. Yeah. And mostly virtual. Simple. Yeah. We don't have a central office where everyone's hanging out doing everything, but we keep a pretty lean ship.
And there's a couple things you mentioned that are pretty different, I think, from what I see more often than not. One, you don't have an office, right? So most people are virtual. And 2, you actually have people overseas. Even you said you had a closer overseas.
Yeah.
Right?
So we have, it is unusual. And we've had overseas closers over the years. And I think a big part of that is because when our business started to like really come together was during COVID. So we couldn't really have an office and it was hard to find local people. People were hanging out on unemployment, different things. And so we started first with Central American talent. We could find people that were good on the phone, could close deals and those sort of things. And then we actually started picking up some Filipinos that can close, which is, and I say that because usually people are pretty taken aback by that, because anyone that's worked with Filipinos before, they tend to be a little bit timid on the phone. They don't quite have the gusto to like close deals. But just everyone else, right? There are personalities that fit that role over there. You just have to find them. And so like our talent pipeline, what that looks like is we'll bring people into that lead manager position. which is like the long-term follow-up, pre-qualification, very sort of simple conversations. And if you have people that are good, they'll always show themselves because you'll see them start to like pry for more information during the lead management, or like they will have the wherewithal to review the notes in your CRM from your AMs on older leads and try to move deals forward. And the one that we have in particular right now, she's awesome. She's younger female. I think she's like mid 20s. And we started to see her potential when she would hit me up in Slack and she'd be like, hey, so I don't know if I was supposed to do this. I saw in the notes that Cody, so that's our AM's name, he said he offered $200,000 for the property. And instead of passing it to Cody, I just told the seller we could still do that. And he said that was okay. Can I send him a contract, or is that like outside of my role? And I was like, absolutely. Let's do that. And so we started to slowly move her into that AM position to give her training. And now she's one of our best closers, and she's awesome. And costs significantly less than a US based team. But the thing that's crazy is with what she makes, she's able to afford such a lifestyle in the Philippines. She bought her family's first car off of the commissions that she's gotten from us. She was able to buy her family's house that they were living in. Like all these different things that like on a standard US salary, even for someone that's making decent money, is relatively hard to do these days.
Yeah, that's super cool. So if I was to take what you did and how you explained you did this and simplify it, tell me if this is right. Basically, you're bringing in these overseas people, it sounds like primarily Filipinos now, into lead management.
Yeah.
And you can view that as like the path from lead management is into acquisitions, and you know what to look for. Yeah. So you probably go through, how many lead managers do you have to go through to find someone like her?
A lot. I think just in the lead management role, over the 6 years I've been in business, we've had over 25 people that have come and gone through that. They churn out. It is a very like mind-numbing role, especially on the lead management. They're making 80 to 100 single dials a day, right? And they're just getting told to F off a lot of the time and not really having productive conversations. So it's hard. And the benefit that I have is I've been in the game for a while, right? And so like for her, that transition, she'd been with us for a full year and had gotten like those sort of reps in before the AM potential started to come out. And I think where most people, especially if you're smaller, the mistake comes in is they want to expedite, right? Like they will have someone that shows promise in like month 2, and then they try to promote them and they're over their skis, right? They're not ready for it yet. And you tend to discount how long it actually takes to build a skill set. And I think a big part of that is because most people that are in the owner role, they've been in real estate, or at least at a learning level, for quite a long time before they're an operator. And so they don't understand that the person that is uninitiated can't just come in and do something really quickly because they want them to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you're saying basically it is a ramp up for sure, and it takes some time. So these are like seeds that you have to plant a long time before you're going to harvest them. We have the same deal in our companies too. Like we have specific roles in the company that we specifically look for certain types of people, historical roles, not because that type of person is the best at that role, but because that type of person is the best at the role that they'll grow into after the initial role. Right, so we're like looking for that future talent, and then this is sort of like the price where they'll build it so in order to become that future talent.
Yeah, and see, that's how I know you're an experienced business owner, because you view people that way. You know, the new entrepreneur, they need someone to come in and be a home run hitter on the first at bat, right? Because they're desperate to have some sort of consistency, but that's not how business works. That's not how people work. And just like everything else, there needs to be time for someone to learn the basics, get comfortable with it, realize that it is something that they want to stick to for the long run. And I think that when real estate wholesalers and flippers, especially when they're small, there's always this concern of these people are going to leave. I don't want to spend all this time training them and have them go and start their own business, things like that. If you build like an actual organization that has a very basic mission, or like you make people feel valued, you'd be amazed at how long people are willing to stick around for. And if they are going to burn out in 3 months, then they weren't a good fit anyway.
Yeah, it really comes down to growth plans. And I say this as a hypocrite because I'm not like the best at this, although I have hired some people on my team who are really good at this. So I'd say like we as a company have gotten much better at this, but not because I'm like some genius or something, mostly because of what other people have done. But the idea is like, why would they leave? They would leave because they see a better path to growth somewhere else.
Absolutely.
It's just how do you build that same path to growth here,
Mhm.
and how do you make it so they see that path of growth? And it's a little bit hard in like a changing business. We just did our like 2025 company kickoff. We did like an in-person event, flew in all of our remote employees and everything. And one of the things that we did there was review people that have grown in the company over the past couple of years. And I had a list of 15 people who are still here today that have different job titles than they had when they first came into the company that represented growth. The thing that I pointed out that I thought was really interesting is 13 out of 15 of those people, the job title that they have right now is not a job title that existed within the company when they were first
Oh,
hired
interesting.
into the
Yeah.
company, which is interesting. Like there's so many weird stuff. Like a digital marketing intern turns into like our first recruiter, and we have someone for fulfillment that moves into account management, or we have our internal marketing team growing and stuff. So it's really it's interesting because if you have a growing company, you really do have a lot of those opportunities, and I'm learning that you can retain talent pretty well with that. But you have to make that path clear. In a small business, it's not always clear. I think
Yeah.
that's the difficulty.
You have to make it clear, right? And you have to make them like feel valued and heard along the way. That's the other thing too, is if you try to
Yeah.
like completely pave it for them, that's not that fulfilling. I feel like, especially people that are drawn to smaller companies, they need a little bit of a rocky road because then they feel like they're actually making progress getting through it. But yeah, that's interesting though. That's cool. That says a lot about you that you've had that much stickability. And I think something too, just on that note to wrap up there, as an entrepreneur and as entrepreneurs, most people that are probably listening, it's hard for us to comprehend that most people are not entrepreneurs. Most people are perfectly happy having a job, right? As long as they feel valued and they enjoy the people that they work with and they agree with what you're doing with the business, the way that it's going. So there's always this fear that someone's going to go and start their own version of it or aren't going to want to stick around because whatever reason. Most people don't want to do that. Like less than 1% of people actually want to do that. And when you understand that, it's a lot easier to bring in people with trust and actually want to support them over the long term and without worrying about like training or competition or whatever people worry about.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I get it. Like I never had that issue, but it's only because I get it because I am that person.
Yeah.
I started this company when I was a sophomore in college.
Oh, wow.
And for me, it was like I could take an unpaid internship or I could just when I started the company, I literally emailed 100 companies and just said, I want to do your marketing. I don't care what you want me to do. I don't care how much you pay me. I don't even care if you pay me. I just want to become a great marketer. And I think I could probably do that by learning how to do your marketing. And that was like the beginning of the company. And that's all it was like really meant to be. And then people, like a lot of entrepreneurs are shocked when they hear this, but like my senior year of college, the company, it was just me. And I had one person that I hired. He was my brother-in-law and he was working like 10 hours a week. And the company had like almost 400,000 that year in revenue.
That's
which
awesome.
almost all went into my pocket because I was doing like almost everything because I wasn't thinking of it like a business. I was just like a glorified freelancer at that time. And that was my senior year of college. And while that was happening, I was looking for jobs. I was actually applying, interviewing for jobs. And a lot of entrepreneurs look at that and are like, why would you ever do that? And for me, I didn't want to have a company. I thought there's like the squirrel suit people and base jumpers and then entrepreneurs, and they're all just the crazy people.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be one of those crazy people.
That's so funny. I'm sure you're not alone on that. I don't know if I can fully relate to that because I wanted out of every W-2 job I had almost instantly. I've been told that I am not a team player and not hireable by 4 different employers. But that I've heard that similar story though from a lot of people.
Yeah, it's what it really came down to for me is I never really had like a real job before I started this company. I had worked at like the grocery store and that kind of stuff, but I was a sophomore in college. Like what kind of jobs do people have by that point in their life? Never like a real corporate job. So maybe I would be like you if I like went down that path. But I'm telling you with the risk tolerance that I have, I don't know that if I started a business at any other point in my life that I actually would have. I don't know that I would have started a business at any other point in my life. And I would be like the guy that you want to hire like within your company because I am like driven. I am an innovator. I can do fantastic work and I'm okay making a quarter what I could on my own working for someone else.
Interesting. Yeah. And yet here you are, you're running a company with 35 people.
Yeah. But the secret was low opportunity cost. At that point in my life, it took me a while to come around. But anyways, so because of that, I believe there's definitely those people, and I've seen those people like, within my company too.
Oh yeah,
You can find some incredible people that do incredible things. That's cool that you figured out how to make that all happen virtually, though. and even from a closing standpoint, but because that's pretty rare to find that.
Yeah. And I think the benefit, like I said, we started with COVID, but also one of my goals when I left corporate America was to be location independent. Like see it over my corner. I have the 4-Hour Work Week back there. That book, I always tell people, is like the book that kind of changed my life, just because a lot of that is around the way that he does like the mini retirements and like building a flexible schedule. Like money wasn't the goal. I just hated the fact that I was stuck in this office, especially when I wasn't busy. And one of the really, I would say like the last straws for me, it was like August, my last year in corporate America, and my wife's sister was visiting, and we wanted to go to this little amusement park that's here. And the way the schedule lined up, she was like, gonna have to go back for school. And so we were going to try and go on like a Thursday. And essentially, with how my vacation days had planned out, if we took a day off to go to this amusement park, I wasn't going to be able to go home for Christmas. And I was like, that's so dumb. It's like the middle of August. And if we choose to take a half day right now, I don't have enough vacation time to go visit my family on Christmas 4 months from now. That doesn't make any sense. And at that point, I was like, I just need to be location independent, whatever I do. But funny, like you, like, even when the real estate stuff started to go off, I still, up until 2021, where I personally made over $1 million, through the end of that, I was still applying for virtual jobs, mostly because it felt I have this imposter syndrome. Even though I had a track record, I knew I could make money, but there is still like that security piece that you don't quite have an entrepreneur that you have to get comfortable with, which does take a long time. And at that point, I was 3 years into entrepreneurship, flipping houses and doing wholesale real estate. But every now and then somebody would strike up with me, and I would go on, forget the site I would use. It was like some like online virtual job website, and I would apply to stuff. I even took interviews a couple of times. I don't know why, because if I got there, I was going to try and just collect a paycheck and do what I was doing anyway. It was just a weird thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is, I'm guessing, I don't know anything about your childhood or anything. I could tell you in my case, it came down to just like the way I was raised, which, like, not in a negative way. I don't mean this like negatively towards my parents in any way, but entrepreneurship wasn't like a thing in our house. Right? It wasn't like a thing that, like, neither of my parents did that. I wasn't exposed to that. You're always caught that path of, you're going to go to school, you're going to get good grades, you're going to get to go to college, you're going to graduate, you're going to get a job. And like, with that being the plan, like, it just took a lot to pry me away from that plan, because that's just what I expected for my life. And honestly, I think I would have been like totally fine if that was my life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that life. I think that's like most people's lives. It's great, but it's hard when that's ingrained in you from a young age, that that's what you do. It's hard to undo that.
Yeah. There definitely is something to that. So my mom's very academically backed. So like her dad, my grandpa, was a professor at USC. And they grew up with that sort of like mentality. So I went into engineering too, was like science driven. That's what all my cousins and stuff did. But my dad, he's from New Zealand. Well, he's technically from the UK, but he spent most of his life in New Zealand. And he had a business down there when him and my mom got together. And they moved to the States in the 80s before I was born. And my dad continued operating his business from New Zealand. So he was running a virtual business from the US that was based out of New Zealand before they had the internet. I remember growing up and like my dad, like, having to run to the fax machine to send stuff, because he just gotten off of an overseas phone call in New Zealand and he needed to get some document down because you couldn't email it yet. So you're probably very right. That's probably where it comes from, as I grew up seeing that a lot. He was doing virtual work way before it was cool.
That's super interesting. He was probably just the weird guy at that point.
Totally, dude. Yeah.
Because it's so inefficient at that point. It's gotten so much better. Like we're at a point where we're in office 2 days a week as a company. I do that intentionally because personally, I like to have an office, and I also like the freedom of working from home. And I think I'm happier with having both than I am with like one of them or the other. But anyways, we basically don't have to, it's not like we change things about how we operate on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when everybody works from home. We operate like a virtual company that just sometimes comes into the office.
Yeah. And see each other in person. Totally.
And that hasn't even taken like an enormous amount of effort. That's just how things are today, because most of what we're doing, even if we're sitting in an office right next to each other, we're slacking each other.
Yeah.
That's how it works. It's wild. Yeah. Speaking of virtual, I want to talk to you about location strategies, because you've gone through this journey of starting out in your market, branching out to other markets, and then going back. We have clients that do both. And honestly, I'm always a little bit torn about it, because some of our clients that are in single markets do incredible. Some of our clients that are national do incredible. It feels like every time we have a client that's getting 10 or 20x ROAS, they tend to be in lots of markets to make that possible. So a lot of our clients that have the best results are in lots of markets, but also many of our clients that have the worst results are in many markets because they end up with 90% contract fallout or something like that. Right. Yeah. So I feel like I've seen like the dark and the good side of both of these. I'm curious just to hear your experience seeing that you've done both and you're doing almost fully virtual business model in a single market. So we're taking the element of like virtual or not out of this. Yeah. And it's strictly just a conversation on one or several markets.
Yeah. So when we first started, we ran the virtual model because of COVID, because we had to. And so we got pretty comfortable buying properties sight unseen, or like at the very basic level, we'd have someone on our team that would go out and run stuff, but also too, just in our local market, Eastern Washington, North Idaho, we would have leads that would come in that would be 2 hours each way to, for one of our guys to go visit. And we're like, that's not efficient to have one of my sales guys or one of us go out there and drive for 4 hours to go and walk this property that we might not even be able to transact, right? Even if we go and we get a contract first or whatever, if we get out there and our contract price is BS, it was still a waste of time. And so because of that, we got comfortable doing things, working with sellers to have them send photos, which is always super hit or miss. Anyone that's trying to do that knows that it's a nightmare. You'll give like the seller your list, and if they can even figure out how to send you the photo, they'll send you the things in their house that they find value in. It'll be like, oh, here's my new vanity that I installed 9 years ago, right, in the bathroom. Yeah. Here's like a light fixture that I think is cool. They don't show you the furnace or the HVAC or the roof, like all the stuff that you actually need to see. We got comfortable with that process. And then so when our market up here, it got really bubbly in 2022 and started turning over, we decided we were going to alleviate our risk because we saw a little bit of a crasher coming, which did happen. We were ahead of it. So we started going to these virtual markets because our general thought was, if we go somewhere that hasn't quite been propped up as much, where we have general connections, people that we know, we've been involved in different masterminds and stuff over the years, we should be able to get deals done. Because what we can do is we can be good at the acquisition piece. We can rely on someone to help connect with buyers, and we'll JV the first couple with them, and then we'll go from there. And so that's what we did. And what we would do is we would stand up these marketing campaigns. We would do the exact same thing that we did in our local market. Most of it back in that time, 22, was direct mail and like cold calling, direct outreach. So we would stand it up. We would work the sales process. We would do our pre-quals. And then what we would do to actually get the photos in these markets is we would send out notaries. So we would basically pay, like if we got someone that had qualified, we had a little like 5-point script. And if they answered 2 of them the correct way, and we would send out a notary. It cost like $75. And we would send them out, and they would have a little list of photos that they needed. And the reason that I like notaries is they were professional. So they would represent your company. It's not like a random boots on the ground that you met on Facebook that like, you don't know how that guy's going to show up at the property, or if he's going to swoop your deal or whatever. The notary's getting hired for a job. They're not very expensive, $75 to $100. And they are comfortable getting a contract signed and verifying who the person is if they need to, because that's what they traditionally are used to. And so doing that in each of these markets, we ended up with a couple different notaries that we didn't even have to book online. We could just text them, and then we could just Venmo them afterwards. And we would have them basically be our boots on the ground. And yes, it would have an associated cost, but it was less risk and more reliable than trying to find some random guy who, if they're an investor, they don't really want to spend the time to drive 2 hours each way to make $100, where a notary will do that. And so we started doing that piece of it, getting contracts signed. And then our dispo strategy was we would pretty much always launch in markets that we knew someone that was already there. So we would encroach on their turf a little bit, and they would either become a direct buyer for us, or they would connect with direct buyers. If they connected us, we would just JV stuff 50-50, do 5 or 6 of those a market. Now we're starting to build our own buyers list, and then we would go direct from there. And outside of that, it was relatively simple, honestly. Like we did have a pretty high drop rate. Our drop rate in our virtual markets was about 40%. Whereas like when we were local and we knew the markets better, we would sit around 15%. And that was typically because we wouldn't understand the neighborhoods. We wouldn't comp things correctly. There would be weird laws around how some of these transactions are supposed to go that we didn't always know. Even right now, we're dealing with one where apparently the county has to do a entire septic inspection there. And we didn't know this until 2 days before closing. So like now we either need to extend it or cancel it if the seller's not willing to work with us on it. Just stuff like that you learn along the way. But it allowed us to be completely independent of any sort of like local market fluctuations. And if one market would start to struggle, the other ones would typically be doing better. And that was the benefit of doing a model, right? The downside was it was hard to nurture relationships with buyers. It was hard to keep up with local laws. There was always like ups and downs with the way these different local economies would go. But it did get us through the period where our market was just overdone. But ultimately, what it came down to is we started focusing on our own market again about 6 months through last year. And then as we got through the final 6 months, me and Dan, we brought home the same amount of money from our local market as we did from our big national program, like actual take home pay, even though it was like a third of the top line. And so we're like, and it was way more work to be running that big team. So we're like, why are we doing that? Let's just bring those resources home. And I bet we can actually have way more take home, even if our top line's lower. And so that's ultimately what we decided to do.
Sure. That makes sense. Interesting. So for you as a strategy, and I get this with your market, especially, and it was hit relatively hard when the interest rates went up. So for you, it was basically, let me not connect my success to the success or failure of the market that I'm in right now.
Correct. Yeah.
That was
And
the
it
biggest
gave us it totally. And honestly, one of the biggest red flags for us, Eastern Washington, North Idaho, most people have heard of Coeur d'Alene as like one of the areas that really blew up during 2021 when the interest rates were low. And there were properties that we would like wholesale some of these deals, right? Like we would get the contract for 400, we'd sell it for say like 430. And then you'd look on Zillow or the MLS, and that property had been bought on market 180 grand in 2019. And so that's essentially like double price, and we're getting it wholesale 3 years later, 2 years later is insane. And then those people would go and buy it, and then they would flip it for like mid 500s. And so it was just so out of control. And one of the big red flags for us, we had these properties that we bought. They were like basically sheds from Lowe's, like honestly, like they were like these little funky sheds, like they had plumbing and stuff. They were livable. And we opted to flip these because we got them super cheap, and they were right on the water of this lake. It's like middle of nowhere lake. And we sold each of them for 300 grand. These things are like 200 square feet. They're tiny. And we were like,
Wow.
okay, this is a problem. We need to not be here because there's no way this is going to continue.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane. Okay, so you saw that happen. You saw that writing on the wall. So looking back, are you glad you did that? You felt like that
Oh,
was the
yeah.
way to make it through that season. But now
Yeah.
that the season's a little different, you feel like you'll do better in your home market.
We will, because I think that the business has changed, like the industry as a whole. So back then, I'm glad we did. Like our main competitor in 22, after we bailed, they lost like multiple seven figures, and they actually went out of business. Right? They were sitting on all these properties that they were trying to wholesale. They way over their skis on costs, and one of the owners of that's actually one of our partners now, which is cool. He was the sales guy that really helped them scale, and he's working with us now, which has been good. But so we avoided that. But one of the challenges with the virtual model is I really feel like now to be successful in this business, because it's so much more professional on both the seller and buyer side, the actual branding piece is really important. And if you are a national company, it is harder to have that. Like you can have a good website and you can run ads, you can have a professional appearance, but there's something about being a company that like your sellers like know is there. They can see where you're located, right? Everything on your website is very specific to the area. You speak the language, you say the street names right. You know how to, local going ons. I really think there's a lot more power in that. It's a lot more important than there used to be. Right. And so we ultimately just decided to go and build that route and really focus on building a strong local company. And I think we'll ultimately make more money doing that.
Yeah. And I still don't know where I stand on the whole like virtual versus local play. I can tell you, I 100% believe that the tides have shifted more towards local.
Yeah.
And if we think about that, like even just based on where the market's at, because virtual and nationwide became especially popular, like in that crazy time where you could find a house in the middle of nowhere and sell it for 100% of ARV to a cash buyer because the cash buyer couldn't find anything else. And all you had to do was just email it out to them and they were on it. Versus now the buyer relationships are becoming so much more important. So if you think of the national model, what does it do? It makes acquisitions easier because you can find a larger number of of motivated sellers, but it makes dispositions harder. And while we're in a market where dispositions is becoming naturally harder, that model kind of, you're doing hard dispositions in a market where it's hard compared to moving with the market, which is what you did.
Yeah. And the disposition is just so relationship focused, right? And even on the acquisitions piece too, I think that back in 21, 22, 23, the whole like iBuyer concept hadn't left such a bad taste in everyone's mouth yet as it has now, because that was just something that we started to find as we were getting into the middle of last year, is we had to convince people that we weren't like a hedge fund. And we're like, oh, we're still a small company. And they're like, how come you're trying to buy houses in, South Carolina? I'm like, oh, but you're in Washington, but you're not like a big fund. You're not one of the iBuyers. No. And so there's always like this trust me, bro thing, but people didn't like that. Versus if you're like actually a local company, people can verify that on there. And so that kind of swayed it a little bit too. It's just like the overall presentation as a national company was harder to get people to buy into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for the conversation, Mike. I feel like I learned a few things. Hope the audience did as well. If anybody is interested in connecting with you in whatever way, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, so the Collecting Keys podcast is my show. We've been running that for 3 years. It's a great way to hear what it's like to be a full-time operator if you're new, or if you're already an established operator. We do a lot of kind of like deep dive talks about what's working for us and other people in the market with the economy and different things like that. So definitely check that out. Also, too, you can hit me up on Instagram if you want to talk to me directly at Mike_invest. That's the best way to do it.
Right on. Cool. Thank you, Mike. And for everybody else listening, I'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon.